Hello, you made it to the end of the day. Or perhaps the day has not quite ended, and that is part of the problem. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes not from doing too much, but from thinking too much. From the mind that keeps running long after the body has asked it to stop. You may know it well. That restless turning, late at night, when the room's quiet and the world outside has finally slowed, and yet inside, it is still going. What if? What if the thing you are worried about actually happens? What if you have already made the mistake you cannot see? What if this, whatever this is, the uncertainty, a sense of things shifting, the future that won't hold still, what if this is just the beginning? The anxious mind does not need material to work with. It will create its own. It will take the smallest signal, a message left unread, a number that went down, a project that feels uncertain, a change at work that nobody has explained properly, and it will build from that. Structure after structure, scenario after scenario, all of them vivid, all of them plausible, all of them terrible. And the harder you try to stop, the louder it gets. You may have read all the advice. Breathe. Be present. Let the thought pass like a cloud. You have tried. Sometimes it works. Tonight, perhaps, it isn't working. There is something specific about 2026 that makes this particular kind of anxiety sharper than it has ever been. Not because people today are weaker, they are not, but because the pace has changed, because the future arrives faster now, and it arrives in ways that are harder to predict, harder to prepare for. Entire industries shift in months. Skills that took years to build become overnight things a machine can approximate. The ground under your career, under your sense of yourself as someone capable and useful and needed, it moves. Sometimes it shakes. And you are lying here or sitting here, trying to make the inside of your head quiet enough to sleep. Let me tell you about a man who lay awake with the same question, who sat by a river in the dark and asked it of the water, the stars, the moon, who lived with this particular anxiety for years and wrote his way through it into something that has lasted 1,000 years. By the 3rd year of his exile in Huangzhou, that small riverside town far from everything he had known, the poet had settled into a life he had never imagined for himself. He farmed, he wrote, he drank with friends and meditated in temples and watched the river change with the seasons. He had found, against all expectation, a kind of rhythm. But underneath the rhythm, the anxiety had not left. It was not the anxiety of the early days, the shock of losing everything, the raw fear of survival. That had passed. This was something quieter, and in some ways harder to name. It was the anxiety of a man who could see time passing, who looked at the river and thought, how many great men have stood at a river like this and believed their work mattered, and where are they now? Who looked at his own graying hair and felt the particular dread of someone who has loved his own mind, his own gifts, and who now must wonder whether those gifts were ever equal to the vastness of what they faced. He was 45 years old. The empire did not want him. His enemies were still in power. He did not know if he would ever return to the life he had lost. The anxiety was not dramatic. It was low and constant, like the sound of the river below his window at night. And like the river, it was always there. In the summer of his 3rd year, in the 7th month, he took a boat out onto the water with 2 friends. It was a full moon, the kind of night that feels almost too beautiful for a man who is afraid. The boat was small. The river was vast. The moon came up over the eastern hills and poured itself across the water until the surface looked like hammered silver. They drank. They sang. One friend played a flute, a long, hollow instrument whose sound carries differently over water, thinner and sadder than on land. The music rose and drifted and lingered over the river long after each breath. The poet looked at the cliffs rising dark on either side. He looked at the moon. He thought of how many battles had been fought on this river, how many great men, how many ambitions. All of it now, mist and memory and silence. Before he wrote the long prose poems that would make this night immortal, he wrote something shorter, sharper, a poem meant to be sung that opens with one of the most famous lines in all of Chinese literature. The great river rushes east-out, its waves wash away, one by one, all the brilliant figures of 1,000 years. He wrote about the heroes, the generals, the men who had stood on this same water and believed themselves essential. He wrote about how the river had outlasted all of them, how the waves kept coming long after the names had faded. And then, at the very end, he turned it toward himself. He who had also believed himself essential, he who had also been washed aside. Life is but a dream. Let me raise my cup and pour it out for the river and the moon. That is where the poem ends, not with triumph, not with resignation, with a gesture, a cup of wine offered to the river, to the moon, to the things that are larger than us, and that will remain after us. It is not giving up. It is perhaps the first real breath he had taken in years. They stayed on the water. The flute kept playing. At some point, the music changed, grew sadder, slower. The poet asked his friend why the music had turned so sorrowful. His friend set down the flute. He spoke quietly over the sound of the water. He said, "We are small things. We live for a moment. The great heroes we admire, they are gone. We will also be gone. What is any of this for? What does any of it mean, if in the end the river takes everything?" The poet was quiet for a long time. Then he asked his friend a question. He said, "Do you know the nature of water and the moon?" His friend did not answer. The poet looked at the river moving beneath them. He said, "The water flows and flows, and yet it is never gone. The moon waxes and wanes, and yet it is always whole. If you look from the side of change, nothing in heaven and earth lasts even a moment. But if you look from the side of what does not change, then you and I and all things are without end." He paused. Then, "Between heaven and earth, all things have their owner. What is not mine, I would not take even a thread of it. But the clean wind over the river, and the bright moon between the mountains, the ear receives it as sound. The eye meets it as color doth take them, and nothing is forbidden. Use them, and they are never exhausted. The wind over the river, the moon between the mountains, these belong to everyone. These cannot be taken from you. These will not be made obsolete. His friend smiled. They poured more wine. The boat drifted on. 3 months later, in the 10th month of the same year, he went back. This time, the river was different. Autumn had deepened into something colder. The leaves were gone from the trees. The frost had come. The moon was still bright, but the light it cast was harder, more exact, the kind of light that shows you things clearly, whether you want to see them or not. He walked to the cliffs with 2 friends. They ate by the water, drank what little they had, caught a fish from the river. It was simpler than the summer night, more ordinary. At some point, he left his friends and climbed the cliff alone. The path was steep. The rocks were cold under his hands. He climbed until the river was far below him, and the night was very large, and the sound of the wind in the trees was the only sound in the world. He stood at the top and looked out. The river moved below him like a living thing, slow and certain, unbothered by the dark, unbothered by the cold, unbothered by the small figure of a man standing on a rock above it, wondering what any of it meant. He gave a long cry, the kind that comes from somewhere below words. The sound went out over the water, and the cliffs sent it back changed, stranger, as if something else had spoken. He was afraid, and then he was not afraid. Something had shifted in the giving of that sound to the night. He climbed back down. He and his friends got back in the boat and drifted with the current. Nobody rowing, just moving with the water. A single crane flew over them, huge, white, crossing the river from shore to shore in absolute silence. That night he dreamed of a Taoist priest who smiled at him and asked, "Did you enjoy the Red Cliff?" He woke before he could answer. He looked for the priest. There was no one. He sat with his brush in the pre-dawn dark and wrote the last lines of what would become the second ode, the companion piece to the summer night. The other half of the same conversation. The mountain stands high, the moon seems small. The water falls low, and the stones emerge. What was hidden is revealed. What seemed small was only far away. What felt like loss was only the water drawing back, and underneath, the solid ground always there. He did not resolve his anxiety that autumn. He did not arrive at certainty. But he sat with the river long enough to remember that the river is not afraid. You are still here. The mind may still be turning. The questions may still be there, patient and persistent, waiting in the corners of the room. That is all right. You do not have to resolve them tonight. They will be there tomorrow, and you will meet them then, in the daylight, with more resources than you have right now. Tonight is not for solving. Tonight is for something smaller and more necessary. Listen. Somewhere outside, under the traffic, under the hum of the city, there is something that moves the way rivers move, steady, unhurried, unbothered by whether you are watching. The wind over the city is the same wind that crossed that river 1,000 years ago. The moon if there is one tonight, is the same moon he poured his wine to from a small boat drifting on dark water. These things belong to you. They cost nothing. They cannot be taken. They are never exhausted. The poet stood on a cold cliff in the dark and gave his fear to the night. The night received it. The river kept moving. 1,000 years later, you are lying somewhere quiet. The questions are real. The uncertainty is real. And you are also real, here, breathing, present, in a body that has carried you through every difficult thing so far. That is not nothing. That is everything. Life is but a dream. Pour your wine to the river and the moon. Let the water take what you cannot carry. The mountain is still high. The moon still moves between the hills. And you are allowed to rest. Good night.